Hey guys, welcome to Sleep into Power, where the night becomes a journey. Tonight then, we travel back to the ancient world of Greece, to a time of titans, gods, and mortals, and to the story of one figure who dared to cross the boundary between them. His name was Prometheus. According to the ancient Greeks, he stole something that belonged to the gods and placed it into the hands of humanity: fire. But as we will discover tonight, the gift of fire may have represented something far greater: knowledge, civilization, and perhaps even the awakening of the human mind. If you enjoy immersive history and mythology, told slowly, in the dark, and made for sleep, please subscribe. You will also find guided meditation, relaxation, and consciousness work over on the second channel, Meditate into Power. My book, Sleep into Power, explores sleep, imagination, the subconscious mind, and how to use the quiet hour before sleep a little more intentionally. Every documentary is on Spotify, so you can listen anywhere. And if you would like to help future episodes exist, there is a Buy Me a Coffee link below. Thank you to whoever suggested tonight's subject. You know who you are. Wherever you are listening from, in whatever time zone, whether it is early evening or the small hours of the morning, you are welcome here. I would love to know where you are in the world and what time it is there for you. Now settle back, allow yourself to become comfortable, and let us travel into the distant world of ancient Greece. Begin with darkness, not the darkness of a room with the lights switched off, something older than that. Go back far enough, and the whole world was dark once night arrived, and there was nothing anyone could do about it. No lamp in the window, no glow on the horizon from a city 40 miles away, no aircraft moving slowly between the stars. Simply the earth, and the sky above it, and the enormous unlit distance in between. Picture that world now, a stretch of coastline somewhere in the eastern Mediterranean, long before anyone gave the sea a name. Hills running down towards the water, dry grass, scattered stone, pine and oak on the higher slopes. The air still warm from the day, cooling now, moving slowly inland. There are people here, not many, a few families sheltering in the mouth of a cave, or beneath an overhang of rock, where the wind cannot quite reach them. They have no metal, no writing, no wheel, no medicine beyond what the plants around them happen to offer. They have hands and voices and each other, and the knowledge carried in memory from the generation before. And when the sun goes down, they wait. That is the important detail. They wait. Because the night belongs to other things, to the animals whose eyes work better than theirs, to the cold that settles into the rock, to whatever might be moving out beyond the edge of what they can see. Human beings in that world were not the masters of anything. They were one soft, slow, unarmored species among many, and the dark was not romantic. It was simply the longer half of existence, endured until morning. Then, somewhere in that immense blackness, something changes. A small orange point appears. Perhaps it began with lightning striking a dry tree, and someone brave enough or curious enough to carry a burning branch back with them. Perhaps it began with the discovery that certain stones, struck together, throw sparks. Perhaps it began with friction, with a stick spun patiently against a hollow of dry wood, until smoke appeared, and then, at last, a glow. The archaeology is genuinely uncertain about when this happened, and how often it happened independently, and we will probably never recover the moment itself. What is certain is that it happened, and that nothing afterwards was ever the same. Because that small orange point does something no other animal on Earth had ever managed. It pushes the night back, only a little, perhaps 10 feet in every direction. But inside that circle, the rules change. The cold retreats. The predators hesitate. Faces become visible again, and when faces are visible, people talk. The evening is no longer something to be survived in silence. It becomes time, Hours that had been empty are suddenly available. And the fire does more. Meat that would have been tough and dangerous becomes soft and safe, and releases more of its energy to the body that eats it. Wood can be hardened at the tip. Later, far later, stone can be heated and fractured deliberately, and later still, certain green and rust-colored rocks can be persuaded to weep metal. Everything you think of as civilization is downstream of that little orange point. Every furnace, every forge, every kiln that ever baked a pot or a brick or a roof tile, every ship's lantern, every candle beside every manuscript, every steam engine, every turbine, every rocket that ever left the ground did so by carrying fire in a controlled shape and pointing it downwards. The Greeks understood this. They did not know the archaeology, but they understood the consequence. They looked at the world of cities and temples and bronze and ships, and they looked back towards the imagined time before it, and they recognized that something had been added to human life which was not originally part of it. And they told a story about where it came from. According to that story, the fire was never ours. It belonged to the gods. It burned on their hearths and in their forges, high and far away, and it was not intended to travel downwards. Human beings were meant to live as human beings had always lived, briefly and dimly, and then to stop. One being disagreed. His name was Prometheus. He was not an Olympian. He belonged to an older generation, the Titans, who ruled before Zeus and were defeated by him. His name was understood by the Greeks themselves to carry the sense of forethought, of thinking ahead, of seeing the shape of a thing before it arrives. Some 19th century scholars tried to connect the name instead to an old Indo-European word for a fire drill, the tool used to spin flame out of wood, which would be a beautiful coincidence if it were true. Most linguists today are doubtful. The Greek meaning is the one that mattered to the Greeks, and it is the one that matters here. He was the one who thought in advance, and unlike almost every other figure in Greek mythology, he took the side of human beings, not as a patron of one city, not as the special protector of a hero or a family. He took the side of the species. He looked at a creature with no claws, no speed, no armor, and no natural advantage, standing in the dark at the bottom of the world, and he decided that it deserved more than it had been given. For this he was chained to a mountain at the edge of the known world, and a bird was sent to tear him open, and because he could not die, it happened again the next day, and the next, and the next. For a length of time, the Greeks measured in generations. That is the story. Almost everyone knows the outline of it. What is more interesting, and what we are going to spend tonight moving through slowly, is the question underneath it. Why was this considered such a terrible crime? Not the theft itself. Gods steal from each other constantly in Greek mythology, and rarely suffer for it. Hermes stole cattle from Apollo on the day he was born, and was rewarded with a place among the Olympians. Theft alone does not explain a punishment designed to last forever. Something about this particular gift frightened the ruler of the sky. And if you sit with that for a while, in the dark, with your eyes closed, it begins to feel less like an old story about a fire, and more like an old story about knowledge, and about what happens to a world when knowledge escapes the place it was supposed to stay. Let the room settle around you. There is nothing to solve here. Simply follow the voice. We begin before the Olympians existed at all. To understand why Zeus reacted the way he did, you have to understand how recently, in the timescale of the myths, he had come to power, and how violently and how nervously he held it. The Greeks did not have a single agreed creation story. They had several, told differently in different regions and different centuries, and the poets who wrote them down were not attempting to produce scripture. The version that became most influential comes from a farmer poet named Hesiod, who probably worked in Boeotia in central Greece. somewhere around 700 years before the Common Era, though the dating is debated. His poem, the Theogony, is an attempt to organize the divine world into a family tree, and it is where most of what follows comes from. In Hesiod's account, the beginning is not a person and not a place. It is chaos, which in Greek does not mean disorder. It means gap, chasm, a yawning emptiness with nothing in it. Then Gaia comes into being, Earth. Not the Earth as a planet, because nobody was thinking in those terms yet, but the Earth as a broad and solid surface, the thing that holds everything up. She is the first stable fact in existence, and from Gaia comes Uranos, the sky. He is not born in the ordinary sense. She produces him to be her equal, to cover her completely, and he settles over her like a lid. Picture that if you can, quietly, without straining. A dark plain with no horizon and no light, and above it, a dome of sky pressed close, so close that there is no room between them. Everything that is ever going to exist is trapped in that narrow space. Their children are the Titans, 12 of them in Hesiod's telling, enormous, elemental, older than any concept of morality, associated with the sea and the sun, and memory and law, and the flow of time itself. And Uranos hates them. As each one is born, he pushes it back down into the body of the earth and refuses to let it emerge. Gaia, in pain and in fury, makes a sickle out of grey adamant and asks her children which of them will help her. Only one steps forward, Cronus, the youngest. And when Uranos next comes down over the earth, Cronus is waiting, and he cuts his father with the sickle, and the sky is driven back and away, and never comes so close again. That is the first act of the Greek cosmos. Not creation, separation. A son mutilating his father in order to make space for everything else to exist. From the blood that falls on the earth come the Furies and the giants. From the severed part that falls into the sea comes, in Hesiod's account, Aphrodite, rising near Cyprus. Even beauty in this system arrives out of an act of violence, and Uranos, retreating, leaves a curse behind him. He tells his children that they are stretching beyond their proper limits, and that punishment will come for it. The Greek word associated with this idea is one you will meet several times tonight: hubris, overreach. Taking more than the position you occupy entitles you to take. Remember that word. It is going to matter. Cronus takes the throne and rules the cosmos, and immediately begins behaving exactly like the father he overthrew. He has heard the prophecy. He knows that one of his own children is destined to defeat him in turn. So as each is born to his sister and wife Rhea, he takes the infant and swallows it whole. 5 times this happens: Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, Poseidon. Each one alive inside him, unable to grow, unable to die. When the 6th is coming, Rhea goes to Gaia and Uranos for help, and they hide her away in Crete. And when the child is born, she conceals him in a cave on the mountainside. Then she wraps a stone in swaddling cloth and hands it to her husband, and he swallows that instead without looking closely. The child is Zeus. He grows in secret. In some versions, nymphs feed him goat's milk and honey, and armed spirits called the Kuretes dance and clash their shields outside the cave, so that his crying cannot be heard. Whether any Greek believed this literally is a separate question. Cretan sites associated with the story were genuine places of worship, and visitors were shown particular caves for centuries. When he is grown, Zeus forces his father to disgorge the swallowed children, who emerge fully formed and furious. And then the war begins. The Greeks called it the Titanomachy. 10 years of it. The younger gods on Mount Olympus, the Titans on Mount Othrys, and between them a landscape that comes apart under the strain. Hesiod's description of the final battle is one of the most extraordinary passages in early Greek poetry. The sea boils, the earth screams, The whole of the sky comes down. The heat is so great that it seems as though the ground and the air have caught fire together, and the noise is such that it would sound the same if the sky fell on the earth. Zeus wins because he does something Cronus never thought to do. He frees the prisoners his father kept locked away, the 100-handed giants and the Cyclopes, and they fight for him. And the Cyclopes give him the thunderbolt, which is the weapon that decides everything. The defeated Titans are thrown down into Tartarus, which Hesiod describes as being as far below the earth as the earth is below the sky. A bronze anvil, he says, would fall for 9 days before reaching it. It is sealed with bronze gates and guarded, and the darkness there is described as being piled around the throat of the world. This is the world into which Prometheus enters, not a peaceful cosmos. A recently conquered one, ruled by a god who took power by force from a father who took power by force, in a universe where every generation so far has been overthrown by the next. And here is the detail that makes the whole story more interesting than a simple contest between good and evil. Prometheus was a Titan, but he did not fight against Zeus. He fought for him. Prometheus was the son of Iapetus, one of the 12, and of an Oceanid, whom Hesiod names as Clymene, and other sources name as Asia. He had brothers, Atlas, who was punished after the war by being made to hold the sky apart from the earth forever, Menoetius, who was struck down by a thunderbolt for his arrogance, and Epimetheus. Those two names are usually explained as a matched pair. Prometheus, the one who thinks before; Epimetheus, the one who thinks after. Forethought and afterthought, foresight and hindsight. One brother who sees the consequence coming, and one brother who only understands it once it has arrived. It is almost too neat, and some scholars suspect Epimetheus was invented, or at least reshaped, precisely to be the opposite of his brother. That does not make him less useful. The Greeks liked to think in paired opposites, and this particular pairing describes something real about human beings that no amount of scholarly caution can dissolve. Every person alive has both brothers inside them, the part that calculates and the part that only realizes afterwards. In the war, according to a tradition preserved most clearly in the tragedy Prometheus Bound, Prometheus went first to the Titans and told them how the conflict could be won. Not by force, by cunning. They refused to listen. They were creatures of raw power, and they despised subtlety, and they assumed strength would settle the matter as it always had. So he left them and went to Zeus, and offered the same counsel there, and Zeus listened, which means that when Prometheus is later chained to the rock, he is being punished by a ruler who owes part of his throne to him. Sit with that a moment. There is nothing you need to do with the thought. Simply let it rest. The one who helped build the new order becomes the first serious threat to it. The advisor becomes the dissident. And the god who once valued his intelligence comes to see that same intelligence as the most dangerous thing in the cosmos. Something changed between them. To understand what, you have to look at what Prometheus started paying attention to instead. Down below, on the surface, in the dark, at us. There is a curious gap in Hesiod. He tells you where the gods came from, in enormous detail. He tells you where the rivers came from, and the winds, and the monsters, and the stars. He does not clearly tell you where human beings came from. In the Theogony, mortals simply seem to be present, already there, already sharing the world with the gods at Mecone, before the quarrel begins. Later Greeks noticed this gap, and later Greeks filled it. The tradition that grew up, and which became the most familiar one by the Roman period, says that Prometheus made us, not out of nothing, out of earth and water, out of clay. Slow the image down. It is worth taking your time with. A hillside somewhere, before there were names for hillsides. A stream running down through broken ground. Where the water meets the soil, there is a bank of grey clay, cool and heavy, and slightly damp, the kind that holds the shape of a hand pressed into it. A figure kneels there. He is not in a hurry. He has all the time there has ever been. He takes up a portion of the clay and begins to work it, not carelessly. He is making something specific, and he is making it deliberately in a particular shape, which is his own. 2 legs, so it stands upright and looks forwards rather than downwards. 2 hands, with fingers that oppose each other, capable of gripping and turning and shaping. A skull large enough to be a problem later, and a face that can be read by other faces. Then the figure is set upright in the sun to dry, and something enters it. In some tellings, Athena breathes life into the clay. In others, the animating principle comes from elsewhere. The details vary because the story varied. What stays constant is the sequence. Matter first, then shape, then the mysterious addition that turns a shape into a person. This version is not in Hesiod, and it is important to be honest about that. It appears in later sources. The mythographer known as Apollodorus states plainly that Prometheus fashioned men from water and earth. Ovid, writing in Latin around the beginning of the Common Era, describes a creator working the earth into the likeness of the gods, and he leaves it deliberately open whether that creator was Prometheus or another power. Aesop's fables treat Prometheus as our maker almost casually, as a fact everyone knows, and the traveler Pausanias, walking through Greece in the 2nd century of the Common Era, records that at a place called Panopeus, in Phocis, the local people showed visitors 2 large lumps of clay lying in a ravine. They smelled, he says, rather like human skin. These, they told him, were what was left over when Prometheus made the human race. There is something quietly moving about that, a small town in the hills, keeping the leftovers. The Greeks were entirely comfortable holding several creation stories at once. Hesiod himself gives a different account elsewhere, in his poem Works and Days, where humanity does not appear once but repeatedly, in a sequence of races or ages, each one made and then discarded. First a golden race, who lived without labor or grief, and whose deaths were like falling asleep. Then a silver race, foolish and violent, who were put away. Then a bronze race, terrible and warlike, born from ash trees, who destroyed themselves with their own hands. Then a race of heroes, better and more just, the men who fought at Thebes and at Troy, some of whom were taken to live at the ends of the earth. And then the iron race. That last one is us. Hesiod is not gentle about it. He says he wishes he had died before it, or been born after it. His iron race labors and suffers by day, and dies by night, and the good is always mixed with the bad, and things are getting worse rather than better. You are hearing, in that passage, one of the oldest recorded expressions of a feeling that has never left human beings, the sense that there was a better time, further back, and that we are living in its diminished aftermath. It is not a Greek feeling, it is not an ancient feeling, it is simply a human one, and you will find it in every century including this one. What matters for tonight is the position it leaves us in. Whichever version you take, the Greek human being is a strange and awkward creature, mortal, in a cosmos where the highest beings are not. Made of earth, in a world where the ruling powers are made of something else, standing upright and looking at the sky, but bound entirely to the ground. The Greeks had a word that captures the whole arrangement: mortals. Not humans, not people, mortals. It is how the gods refer to us throughout the literature. The defining fact about our species, from the divine point of view, is not that we think or speak or build. It is that we end. And that is the boundary. That is the line running through the middle of the Greek universe. And everything that happens in this story is a disturbance along it. On one side, beings who do not die, who do not eat ordinary food, who do not age, whose blood is not blood. On the other side, us, briefly, in the dark. Prometheus stands with one foot on each side of that line. Which brings us to the distribution. This story does not come from Hesiod either. It comes from Plato, writing 3 centuries later, in a dialogue called Protagoras. And Plato is not reporting a sacred tradition. He puts the story in the mouth of the sophist Protagoras, who is telling it as a teaching device, to make an argument about whether political virtue can be taught. It is a philosopher's myth, consciously constructed. That does not make it less powerful. In some ways it makes it more so, because you can watch a mind deliberately using an ancient shape to hold a new idea. Here is the story. Before mortal creatures existed, they were formed inside the earth, out of earth and fire, and the things that mix with them. When the time came to bring them into the light, the gods gave Prometheus and Epimetheus the task of equipping them. Every creature was to receive powers appropriate to its nature. Epimetheus asked to do the distribution himself. "Let me hand them out," he said, "and you can inspect the work when I have finished." And Prometheus for once agreed. So Epimetheus began, and he was generous, and he was thorough, and he was careful about balance. To the ones he made small he gave speed, or the ability to fly, or a burrow underground. To the ones he made large, he gave the size itself as protection. He gave claws to some and hooves to others. He gave hides and shells and scales and thick fur, so that each creature could survive its own climate, and bedding beneath them so they could sleep warm. He gave some of them fangs, and others the sheer numbers to survive being eaten. He thought about the food supply, and made sure that the ones who ate other animals bred slowly, and the ones who were eaten bred quickly, so the whole system would hold. Picture it as a long night's work in a workshop with the door open onto an empty world. Creature after creature stepping out into the light, each one equipped, each one fitted to a place. And by the time he reached the end, Epimetheus had run out. He had used everything. He had given away every quality there was to give, and he had been so absorbed in the work that he had not counted ahead. Because he was Epimetheus, he never counted ahead. And there, still standing in the dark, unequipped, was one creature left over, naked, unshod, uncovered, unarmed. That is Plato's phrase, and it lands like a diagnosis. Prometheus arrives to inspect the work, and finds the human being standing there, with nothing at all. No coat against the winter, no claw against the wolf, no speed to escape it, nothing between its soft body and the entire weight of the world. And the day is coming when this creature must go up onto the surface and live. Consider what a strange and accurate observation this is. Strip away every tool a human being has ever made, and what remains is an animal that would struggle badly in almost any environment on Earth. We are slower than most things that hunt us. We are weaker than most things our own size. We cannot see well at night. We cannot smell well at all. We are born helpless and remain helpless for years, far longer than any comparable creature. We cannot survive a cold night in the open without preparation. Everything that makes human beings formidable is added afterwards. The clothing, the shelter, the blade, the fire. The knowledge handed from one person to the next, which is the only reason any individual knows how to do any of it. The Greeks noticed that. 2,500 years ago, without a single fossil or a single comparative anatomy chart, they noticed that we are the animal that is not finished. And so, Plato's story says, Prometheus was at a loss, and then he made a decision. He went and stole. From the workshop of Hephaestus and Athena, he took the technical skill that belongs to craft, and with it, he took fire, because knowledge of craft is useless without fire to work it. And he gave both to human beings. That is the version worth holding on to, because it widens the theft considerably. The fire alone is warmth. The fire with skill attached is metallurgy. It is architecture, weaving, ceramics, shipbuilding, everything. Notice what Prometheus does not steal. Plato is specific. He does not steal political wisdom, the art of living together in cities, because that was kept in the house of Zeus himself, and Prometheus did not dare enter. So the first humans have technology without politics. They can make tools and speak and worship, but when they gather in cities they injure one another and scatter again, because they have the power to build and no idea how to share. Only later, in Plato's telling, does Zeus send Hermes down with two further gifts. Eidos, which is something like shame or reverence or the sense of what is not done, and dike, which is justice. And unlike craft, these are not to be distributed to specialists. Everyone gets them, because a city cannot exist if only a few people have a conscience. There is a whole philosophy of civilization folded into that. Technical ability arrives by theft, and it arrives first. The ability to live together arrives afterwards, as a gift, and it is still arriving. You might find, if you let the thought drift, that this describes the present moment rather uncomfortably well. We have never had trouble acquiring the fire. It is the second gift that seems always to lag behind. But we are ahead of ourselves, and the night is long, and there is no hurry at all. Let the breath slow, let the shoulders drop. Nothing in this story requires anything from you, because before the theft, in the older and stranger version, something else happened first. There was a dinner. The place was called Mecone. Later Greeks identified it with Sicyon, a city on the northern coast of the Peloponnese, west of Corinth, looking out across the gulf towards the mountains of the mainland. Whether that identification is correct, nobody can now say. In Hesiod, it is simply the place where gods and mortals were settling something between them. That phrase deserves attention. Gods and mortals at the same table, negotiating. There is an entire lost world implied in it, a time before the separation was complete, when the two kinds of beings still ate together and still had things to agree. What happens at Mecone is the end of that arrangement. It is the last supper of the old order. An ox is brought, a great one, and it is to be divided, and the division will establish, permanently, which portion belongs to the gods and which belongs to human beings whenever an animal is killed in sacrifice from that day onwards. Prometheus does the carving. Picture the scene at dusk, an open space of trodden earth, the smell of the animal, and of dust, and of the sea somewhere below. The Olympians present in whatever form the imagination allows, and the mortals standing further back, watching, because their entire future is being decided by the arrangement of meat on the ground. Prometheus makes two portions. Into the first he puts the flesh and the rich inner parts, everything that is worth eating, and he wraps it inside the stomach lining of the animal. It looks like offal. It looks like the part you would leave. Into the second he puts the bare white bones, arranged carefully, and he covers them over with the glistening fat, so that the whole thing shines in the low light. It looks magnificent. It looks like the best of the beast. Then he invites Zeus to choose. And here Hesiod does something fascinating and slightly awkward, and generations of readers have argued about it. He tells us that Zeus recognized the trick. He saw the deception and was not fooled by it. And then he chose the shining portion anyway, and took up the fat in both hands, and found the white bones underneath, and rage rose in him. Why would Hesiod write it that way? Probably because he could not bear the alternative. To say plainly that the king of the gods was outwitted by a titan would undermine everything the poem is built on. Zeus in the Theogony is the guarantor of order, the one whose mind cannot be got around. So Hesiod gives us a Zeus who sees the trap and steps into it deliberately, because he has already decided what the consequence will be. It creates a strange doubling. The deception succeeds and fails at once. The gods end up with the bones forever, which is what Prometheus wanted, and Prometheus ends up destroyed, which is what Zeus wanted. Nobody is really tricked. Both parties get exactly the outcome they arranged. That is not incompetent storytelling. That is a poet trying to explain a ritual he inherited and could not change. Because here is the practical background, and it is the key to the whole episode. Greek animal sacrifice really did work this way. It is one of the best documented things about ancient Greek religion. When an animal was killed at an altar, the thigh bones were wrapped in fat and burned, and the smoke went upwards to the gods, and the meat was roasted and eaten by the people present. Consider how that must have looked to a thoughtful person standing in the smoke. Here is a religious act of the highest seriousness, and the result of it is that the immortal, all-powerful beings receive bones and vapor, and the community receives dinner. It was a fair question to ask why, and the story of Mecone is the answer the tradition produced. It happens this way because a titan arranged it this way once, at the beginning, and the arrangement was made permanent by the anger of the god who accepted it. So this is not a prank. Underneath the folktale roughness, there is something serious being worked out. It is a division of the world. Ask what is actually being separated on that hillside. The gods take the bones, and the smoke, and the fat, and the fragrance. That is to say, they take the parts that do not decay, the frame that outlasts the animal, and the part that rises and vanishes. Human beings take the meat, the perishable part, the part that must be eaten quickly or it spoils, exactly like the creature eating it. The division tells you what each kind of being is. The immortals get what does not rot, the mortals get what does. Every sacrifice performed for the next 1,000 years quietly restates that fact. And a further question is settled at Mecone, which is the one Prometheus keeps returning to for the rest of his existence. Who decides? Nobody at that table asked whether Prometheus had the authority to allocate the shares. He simply took the knife and did it. He put himself in the position of the one who determines what belongs to whom. From the perspective of a newly established sovereign who has just fought a 10-year war to establish exactly that authority, this is not a small matter. It does not really concern the ox at all. Zeus responds accordingly. He takes the fire away. Hesiod says he would not give the power of tireless fire to the ash trees for mortal men who live upon the earth. That line is obscure, and scholars have puzzled over it for a long time. It may refer to lightning striking trees, which is a natural way for fire to reach the ground. It may refer to the ash wood used in fire drills. Either way, the meaning is clear enough. The channel by which fire came down to human beings is closed. Now think about what that means for the people in the story. They have had it. That is the cruelty of it. They know what it is like. They have sat inside the circle of light, and cooked, and stayed warm, and talked into the evening. This is not a species that has never known fire. This is a species that has known it and had it removed. So the nights get longer again, the food gets harder. The winters take more of the old and more of the young. The clay that could have been fired stays soft. The ore in the hillside stays a colored rock. Every process that requires heat simply does not happen, which is nearly every process that leads anywhere. Human progress does not slow down. It stops, and it stays stopped, indefinitely, by decree. And somewhere above them, a titan watches this happen. He had already begun to think of them as his, whether he made them out of clay in one version, or found them naked and unequipped in another. He had put something of himself into the arrangement. And he watched the lights go out. Then he decided, this is the moment the whole myth turns on. And it is worth being clear about what kind of decision it is. Prometheus has foresight. That is his defining attribute, the meaning of his name, the reason Zeus valued him in the war. He is the one who sees what is coming, which means he knew. He knew what would happen to him. Not vaguely, not as a risk he accepted. He could see the mountain, and the chain, and the bird, and the endlessness of it, and he went anyway. That is what makes him something more than a trickster. A trickster gambles. Prometheus calculated, saw the full price, and paid it in advance. Let the story slow here. Let yourself be somewhere very high and very quiet, the realm of the gods, at night. Not a palace in the way you might imagine a palace, with rooms and corridors. Something more like an idea of a summit, above the weather, where the air is thin and clean and the stars are unnaturally close and hard. Below, the tops of clouds lie across the world like a floor, and there is fire here. Of course there is. It is on the hearths and in the forge of Hephaestus, where the metal is worked. It burns without needing to be fed, because it belongs here. In the Greek imagination, this fire is not merely hot. It is the pure form of the thing, of which every earthly flame is a copy. Prometheus moves through this place quietly. He is not a warrior. He has no thunderbolt. He has only the ability to think ahead of everyone around him. And on this night that is enough. Urges, he is carrying a stalk. The Greek word is narthex, and it refers to giant fennel, a real plant that grows across the Mediterranean, tall and hollow with a dry pith inside. This is one of those details that tells you the myth grew out of practical life rather than pure imagination, because the fennel stalk genuinely was used to carry fire. The pith smolders slowly inside the tube, without burning through the outer casing, and it can be carried for miles and blown back into flame at the other end. Shepherds and travelers used exactly this method. Anyone in the audience would have seen it done. So the theft of divine fire is committed with a piece of ordinary agricultural technology. He takes a spark, only a spark. That is all that is needed, because fire has the extraordinary property that giving it away does not diminish it. You can light 1,000 torches from one flame, and the first flame is exactly as bright at the end as it was at the start. Hold that thought, because it is one of the deepest things in the story. Prometheus does not steal a treasure that leaves a gap on a shelf. He steals a pattern. He copies something. The gods lose nothing measurable, and that is precisely why the crime is so serious. What has been taken is not a quantity, it is an exclusivity. Then he goes down through the thin air and the cold, down through the cloud layer, down the long slope of the world, towards the dark plain where the people are. And they are waiting, not for him. They do not know he exists. They are simply doing what they have always done, which is sitting in the cold and waiting for morning, because that is what the night is for. He comes into that darkness with a smoldering stick. The first fire is small. It always is. A handful of dry grass. A few thin twigs laid carefully so the air can move between them. Someone leaning close and breathing on it, gently, the way you would breathe on something newborn. Then the grass catches, and the light arrives, and the faces around it appear out of nothing. And now the second most remarkable thing happens, which is that somebody carries a branch from that fire to another place and lights a second one, and from the second comes a third. If you could rise up above that landscape and watch through the hours of the night, you would see them appearing. 1 point, then 2, then a scatter, then a constellation of small orange lights spreading across the plain and up into the valleys, following the rivers, reaching the coast. Below, the fires, above the stars, and between them, for the first time, a species that has both. That image is the center of everything tonight. Hold it as long as you like, because what has actually been given is not warmth. It is the ability to transform. Fire is the one tool that changes the nature of a substance, instead of merely changing its shape. A blade cuts wood. Fire turns wood into heat and light and ash, which is something else entirely. Clay becomes pottery, and pottery can hold water and grain that can be stored is agriculture, and agriculture is settlement, and settlement is the city. Copper and tin sweat out of stone and become bronze, and bronze is the plow and the chisel and, inevitably, the sword. Sand becomes glass, and glass becomes the lens, and the lens becomes the telescope, and the telescope reaches back towards the stars that were watching the first fire. Everything follows. Mathematics, because you must measure what you build. Writing, because you must record what you own. Navigation, because a settled people trade and trade goes by sea. Medicine, astronomy, philosophy, and eventually the strange late business of a species asking why it exists at all. The Greeks did not know the chain in that detail. They knew the direction. They knew that fire sat at the beginning of the road that led to everything they had, and Prometheus put it in their hands, in a hollow stalk of fennel, in the dark. Whatever human beings were before that night, they are not that anymore. Up on the mountain, Zeus sees the lights. Hesiod puts it simply. He saw among men the far-seen gleam of fire, not one flame, the gleam of it, spread out, visible from a great height, a whole landscape, suddenly punctured with light, where there had been nothing. And the modern instinct, almost universally, is to side against him for what he does next. It is worth resisting that instinct for a while, because a story you have already judged cannot teach you anything. Ask the harder question. Why would the ruler of the cosmos care? The easy answer is tyranny. He is powerful. He wants to stay powerful. And a species with fire is harder to control. There is something in this, and Prometheus Bound leans on it heavily. But if that is the whole explanation, the myth is thin, and the Greeks who told it for 1,000 years were not thin thinkers. Look instead at where Zeus stands in his own story. He is the third ruler of the cosmos. The first was overthrown by his son. The second was overthrown by his son. Every previous holder of the throne has been destroyed by someone who came from below, and every one of them was warned in advance and could not prevent it. He is not a secure king. He is a king standing at the end of a very short and very consistent pattern, and the pattern says that power flows downwards until it is taken back upwards. Now watch what happens at Mecone. A being from the older generation appoints himself the one who decides how the world is divided. Then that being arms the creatures at the bottom with the one thing that lets them climb. From inside the story, this does not look like generosity. It looks like the opening move of the next overthrow. And there is a second consideration, which matters more to the Greeks than it does to us. The Greek cosmos is not a moral hierarchy where the strongest simply rule. It is an order, and the word matters. Every kind of being has a portion, a share, a place. The Greeks had several words circling this idea, and one of them, Moira, means both fate and portion, the lot you are allotted. To stay within your portion is to be in harmony with the structure of things. To exceed it is hubris, and hubris, in Greek thought, is not merely arrogance. It is a category error, with consequences built into the fabric of the world. Human beings had a portion. Mortality, labor, limitation, a short life in the light, and then the grey afterwards. It was not a punishment, it was a definition. Prometheus did not merely give humanity a useful object. He began to move the boundary. He gave a mortal creature the ability to do things that had belonged, until then, to gods. To transform matter, to make light in darkness, to create heat where the sun does not reach. Ask an ancient audience what that resembles, and they will tell you, without hesitation, that it resembles becoming divine. That is the thing Zeus is looking at from the summit, not the fire itself, the trajectory. If they have fire tonight, they will have bronze in 1,000 years. If they have bronze, they will have ships and armies and walls. If they have walls, they will have cities, and cities produce writing, and writing produces memory that outlives the person who holds it, which is the beginning of a kind of immortality. Where does the line end? At what point does the creature that was made of clay stop climbing? The question the myth is asking is genuinely open, and it has never closed. Is knowledge inherently liberating, or can knowledge destabilize the order that everything depends on? We are trained to answer the first way immediately. Knowledge is good. Restriction of knowledge is tyranny. That answer belongs to a particular period of history, and it is a decent answer, and it has produced a great deal of what is best about the modern world. The Greeks were less certain. They had watched what happened when cities acquired the ability to build better ships and better weapons than their neighbors. Their central epic is about a 10-year war. They knew that the same skill produces the plow and the spear, and that nobody has ever managed to have the first without the second. So Zeus, in the myth, does not simply take the fire back. That has been tried, and it failed. He does something more sophisticated. He accepts that humanity will keep the fire, and he arranges the terms on which they keep it. He turns to Hephaestus, the smith, the one god who works with his hands, and he tells him to make something. Not a weapon, not a punishment in any recognizable sense. He tells him to mix earth with water and to shape it into the form of a young woman, beautiful as an immortal goddess, and to give her voice and strength and movement. Notice the material: earth and water, clay, exactly what Prometheus is said to have used. Zeus is answering the Titan in the Titan's own medium, and there is a cold elegance in that which the Greeks would have appreciated. Then each of the gods contributes. Athena teaches her weaving and dresses her, and puts a silver robe on her and a veil worked with embroidery. The Graces and Persuasion hang golden necklaces at her throat, and the seasons crown her with spring flowers. Aphrodite pours grace over her head, and with it, the longing that loosens the limbs and the cares that wear the body away. And Hermes, last, puts into her a mind and a nature. The god of thieves and messengers and boundaries gives her the ability to speak persuasively, and something Hesiod describes with real hostility, a character that does not match the surface. Then she is named Pandora, all gifts. The name is ambiguous in Greek, and the ambiguity is probably deliberate. It can mean the one who was given all gifts, which is what Hesiod says happened. It can also mean the one who gives all gifts, and that reading connects her to older earth goddess figures, since the earth is the giver of everything that grows. There are ancient images that seem to show her rising out of the ground, rather than being carried down from heaven. Scholars have argued about this for a long time, and there is no settled answer, only the sense that something older is standing behind the figure Hesiod hands us. We should be careful here, because the way this story has been used is not the same as what the story says. Hesiod is unkind about women in a way that is unmistakable and cannot be explained away. His Works and Days uses Pandora as the origin of a whole category of complaint, and later centuries seized on it enthusiastically, and it fused with quite separate traditions from elsewhere until a single flattened idea emerged. A woman was curious, and therefore everything went wrong. That is not what the myth contains, once you look at it properly. Look at who actually acts. Pandora does not decide to come into existence. She does not choose her nature, which is installed in her by a god. She does not choose her destination. She is made to specification, for a purpose, by the ruler of the cosmos, and delivered as an instrument. She is the first designed being in Western literature, made of earth, given a mind by an outside power, and sent to do something she does not know she is doing. If you want to find her descendants, you will not find them mainly in stories about women. You will find them in every story about a made thing that arrives among people carrying an instruction nobody can read. She is brought to Prometheus. And here the two brothers matter enormously, because Prometheus had warned him. He had told his brother explicitly never to accept a gift from Zeus, but to send it back, in case some harm should come to mortals through it. Prometheus accepted the gift. Of course he did. He is the brother who understands afterwards. He looked at her, and she was beautiful, and the warning was an abstraction, and she was standing in front of him, and he accepted. Hesiod says it plainly. He took the gift, and only when he had it did he understand. And then there is the jar, not a box. This is worth being precise about, because the correction is genuinely interesting, rather than pedantic. The Greek word is pithos, and a pithos is a large storage vessel, often as tall as a person, made of coarse pottery, and frequently sunk partway into the ground. Greek households kept grain and oil and wine in them. They are the containers of preservation, of the stored surplus that lets a settlement survive a bad winter. Some were used for burial. The box came later. When Erasmus translated the story into Latin in the 16th century, he rendered the vessel as pyxis, which is a small box, and the substitution stuck, and 400 years of paintings and poems and idioms followed the error. So the phrase everyone uses today rests on a Renaissance scholar's slip. Picture it correctly instead. A great clay vessel standing in the corner of a house, wide at the shoulder, sealed with a lid. And picture the ordinary human moment. A new person in a new home, and an object nobody has explained, and the long afternoon, and the ordinary and entirely blameless wish to know what is inside. Hesiod does not even say she was told not to open it. He says she lifted the lid and scattered the contents, and that this was planned. What comes out has no shape. That is what makes it frightening. Hesiod calls them cares, griefs, evils, sicknesses. They are not monsters. They are conditions. They go out into the air, and they spread across the earth and the sea, and they move by day and by night, silently, because Zeus took away their voice. That last detail is a masterstroke, and it is easy to miss. The sufferings that entered the world are silent. They do not announce themselves. They arrive without warning, and you do not hear them coming. Anyone who has received bad news on an ordinary Tuesday understands precisely what Hesiod means. Before that moment in his account, human beings lived free of hard work and of the difficult sicknesses that bring death. Afterwards, illness walks among people constantly. And then the last line, and the reason this story never resolves. She shut the lid before one thing could get out. Elpis, usually translated as hope, more accurately, expectation. The anticipation of what is coming, which may be good or may not be, since the Greek word does not carry the warmth that hope carries in English. Elpis remained inside the jar, under the rim, and did not fly out. And nobody has ever been able to agree what that means. If the jar contains evils, and hope stayed inside, then hope did not reach us, and we live without it. That is the darkest reading. If the jar was a container of goods that have escaped and been lost, then hope is the one thing we manage to keep. That is the warmest reading. If hope is inside the jar, and the jar is in our house, then it is with us, but sealed away, available, but not free, which is closer to how hope actually behaves. And there is a fourth reading, which is the one that lingers. Consider what expectation actually does to a mortal creature. It makes the future present. It makes you carry tomorrow's outcome around with you today. An animal does not do this. An animal suffers when suffering arrives, and stops when it stops. A human being suffers in advance, and hopes in advance, and is therefore never entirely where it is. Foresight, in other words. The exact quality that defines Prometheus. He gave humanity the ability to think ahead, and thinking ahead is the tool that builds the city, and it is also the thing that lies awake at 3 in the morning, turning over a conversation that has not happened yet. Hesiod does not tell you which reading is correct. He simply closes the lid and moves on. We can leave it closed too. Some things are better carried into sleep unresolved. And now, at last, the mountain. Zeus does not argue with Prometheus. There is no trial and no negotiation. In Hesiod, it happens in a few lines, with the brevity of something that was never in doubt. He binds him in inescapable bonds, painful chains, driven through the middle of a pillar. Where this happens is not entirely clear in the earliest sources, and it is worth saying so honestly. Hesiod does not name a location. Aeschylus places it at the very edge of the world, in Scythia, in an untrodden waste beyond the reach of any human being. Later tradition settled on the Caucasus, the great range running between the Black Sea and the Caspian, which for the Greeks was the boundary of the known and the beginning of everything they had only heard about. That is where most people picture him now, and there is no reason not to. So go there. It is a long way from the warm hillsides of Greece. The mountains here do not roll. They stand up out of the land in walls, grey and enormous, with snow held permanently in the high places, and cloud moving through the passes without ever quite clearing. Come up above the tree line, above the last thorn and the last patch of grass, where there is only rock and ice and the wind, which never stops, which is the only sound there is. There is a cliff face here, dark and sheer, with a long fall beneath it, and nothing at the bottom worth looking at. And there is a figure, fixed against the stone. He is not struggling, that stopped a very long time ago. The chains are not ordinary metal, and there is no arrangement of strength that would matter. His arms are held wide. His head is upright, because he is looking outwards rather than down, across a horizon with nothing in it. The tragedy Prometheus bound opens exactly here. Two figures called Might and Violence drag him to the rock, and Hephaestus does the nailing. And Hephaestus does not want to. He is a craftsman, and this is not craft. He says he has no heart for it, and that kinship and long acquaintance make it terrible. And Might tells him to get on with it, and he does. And the thing that has always struck readers is that Prometheus says nothing at all while it is happening. Not one word through the entire operation. Only when the others have gone, and he is alone with the mountains and the sea and the air, does he finally speak. And the first thing he does is call on the elements to look at what a god is suffering at the hands of gods. There is a great deal of noise in Greek tragedy. That silence is louder than any of it. And then the bird. Each day, an eagle comes. In some versions it is the bird of Zeus himself. In others, a monstrous offspring of older powers. It comes across the empty air, and it settles, and it feeds on his liver. The description in the sources is not lingering, and we will not linger either. There is no need. The horror of this punishment is not in the detail. It is in the arithmetic, because he cannot die. The liver grows back. Whatever was taken during the day is restored during the night, and in the morning the eagle returns to a body that is whole again, and does it once more, again, and again, and again. For how long? The sources vary wildly, which tells you they are reaching for a number that means forever. Some traditions say generations. Aeschylus has Prometheus say he must first endure 10,000 years. Others speak of 30,000. The precise figure is not the point. The point is that when he wakes, there is no reason to believe today will be different from yesterday, and no calendar, and nothing to count towards. That is a punishment designed by someone who understood suffering very well. Pain ends. Repetition without end is a different category of thing. Why the liver? There is a practical answer and a symbolic one, and they are both interesting. The practical answer is that the liver is, uniquely among the major human organs, capable of substantial regeneration. Remove a large portion of it, and the remaining tissue will grow to restore the mass. This is genuinely true, and it is the reason living donor transplants are possible. Whether any ancient Greek knew this from observation is impossible to prove. It is at least worth noticing that of all the organs a story could have chosen, the myth landed on the one that actually does grow back. The symbolic answer runs deeper. Across the ancient Mediterranean and the Near East, the liver was not a filter, it was a seat. It was widely understood as a center of the passions, of appetite and desire and courage and anger. In parts of Greek thought, it is where the strongest and least governable feelings live. Plato locates something of the sort in that region of the body, in the part of the soul that wants rather than reasons. And it was an instrument of prophecy. Across Mesopotamia, and among the Etruscans, and in Greek practice too, diviners read the livers of sacrificed animals to determine the will of the gods. There are surviving clay and bronze models of livers, marked into zones, used as reference tools for interpreting what a particular fold or discoloration meant. To inspect a liver was to read the future. Hold those two facts together, and the punishment becomes precise. Zeus has chained the god of forethought to a rock, and each day he sends a bird to devour the organ associated with foresight and desire. The one who could see what was coming has the seeing part of him eaten, daily, and daily it grows back, so that he can want and anticipate and know and lose it again. It is not a beating, it is a comment, and there is one further cruelty, which Aeschylus understands perfectly. Prometheus has foresight, so every night, lying in the cold with the wound closing, he knows exactly what the morning holds. He has always known. He knew on the night he carried the fennel stalk down the mountain. He is the only being in the story who never gets to be surprised. Sit with him there for a moment, high up in the wind. You do not have to feel anything about it. The story has been told for nearly 3,000 years, and he is still on the rock, and still nobody has been able to help him. Simply notice him, and notice the cold, and let the image go where it wants to, because he is not entirely powerless. This is where Prometheus Bound becomes something far stranger and more interesting than a play about a suffering hero. The tragedy is traditionally attributed to Aeschylus, the earliest of the great Athenian dramatists, who fought at Marathon and died around the middle of the 5th century before the Common Era. It is only fair to say that a substantial number of modern scholars doubt he wrote it. The style, the meter, and the theology differ from his other surviving plays in ways that are difficult to explain. It may be by a later hand, possibly his son. The argument has run for over a century without resolution, and it does not much affect the story, but you should know that the attribution is contested rather than certain. What is certain is that it was part of a trilogy, and the other two plays are lost. We have fragments and titles. Prometheus Unbound, Prometheus the Firebringer. So the version most people know is a single act of a 3-act structure, and the resolution that Aeschylus or whoever wrote it intended has largely vanished. In the play that survives, the chained Titan has one thing left, and it is the only thing that has ever mattered in this story. He knows something Zeus does not. He knows a prophecy, and the prophecy concerns the very pattern we traced at the beginning of tonight, the one that destroyed Ouranos and destroyed Cronus, and might yet destroy the one who followed them. There is a marriage Zeus intends to make, and if he makes it, the child of that union will be greater than the father, and the throne will change hands again. Prometheus knows which marriage. Zeus does not. Consider the balance of that scene. On one side, the ruler of the cosmos, holding the thunderbolt, in complete command of every physical thing that exists. On the other, a prisoner, nailed to a cliff at the end of the world, who cannot move his arms. And the prisoner has the advantage, because information is the one form of power that captivity does not remove. Zeus sends Hermes to demand the secret. It is one of the great confrontations in Greek drama, and it goes badly for Hermes, who arrives with the authority of the king of the gods and finds it does not purchase anything. Prometheus refuses. He points out, with something close to contempt, that he has already been through the worst that can be done, and there is nothing further to threaten him with. He tells the messenger that he would not trade his misfortune for that servitude. He calls him, in effect, the errand boy of a tyrant. And Hermes leaves, and the mountain is split by lightning, and Prometheus goes down into the depths still holding it. For the record, since the play does not tell you, the secret concerns the sea goddess Thetis. Both Zeus and Poseidon desired her, and the prophecy said her son would surpass his father. Once the warning was received, she was married off to a mortal, a man named Peleus, and their son was Achilles, who was indeed greater than his father. and who died at Troy. The whole shape of the Iliad rests on a divine marriage that was arranged to avoid a prophecy. So the knowledge in Prometheus's possession is not a curiosity, it is the hinge of the age of heroes. And notice how consistent the pattern has become. At Mecone, he wins because he knows something about how the portions look from the outside. He steals fire, which is knowledge in physical form. He knows what will happen to him and goes anyway. And chained on a rock with nothing at all, he still holds leverage over the king of the gods, because he holds a fact. The myth keeps making the same statement in different materials. Knowledge changes who has power, every time. And this is where the play does something remarkable, because it lets Prometheus list what he actually gave humanity. And the list is much longer than fire. He describes people who had eyes but could not see, and ears but could not hear, who lived like shapes in dreams, muddling everything together at random for the whole length of their lives. They had no houses built of brick to catch the sun. They did not know how to work in wood. They lived underground, in caves without light, like ants. And then he changes it. He shows them the risings and settings of the stars, which is the beginning of the calendar, and therefore of agriculture. He gives them number, which he calls the finest of inventions, and the joining of letters, and the memory of all things, which is the mother of the arts. That is writing. He describes it as the technique that lets a mind outlast the person carrying it. He yokes the ox to the plow and puts the horse under the chariot, so that muscle other than human muscle does the work. He builds ships. He calls them the linen-winged chariots of the sailors, and he says he was the one who invented them, and the sea becomes a road instead of a wall. He gives them medicine, mixing gentle remedies, so that a sick person had something other than waiting, and he gives them divination, the reading of dreams, of birds, of the entrails of sacrifice, of flames, which is to say, he gives them the attempt to see the future, which is his own attribute, handed downwards. And finally, buried beneath the ground, he shows them the metals: bronze, iron, silver, gold. He says it in one line, almost dismissively, and the line contains the entire material history of civilization. Then he summarizes the whole speech in a single sentence. Every art that mortals have comes from Prometheus. That is an extraordinary claim to put on a stage in Athens, and it changes what the fire means. Fire is no longer an object he handed over. It is a shorthand. It stands for the entire process of a creature waking up, looking at the world, and beginning to work out how it operates. The theft of fire is the awakening of the human mind. And on that reading, Zeus was not objecting to the flame, he was objecting to us noticing things. Ages pass on the mountain, the wind does not change, the eagle keeps its appointment, and then, one day, something comes up the slope. It is not a god. That is the point of it. After all those years of divine argument, the thing that finally arrives is a man, on foot, carrying a bow, wearing a lion skin. Heracles. The Romans called him Hercules. He is the son of Zeus by a mortal woman, which makes him precisely the kind of being the whole system was designed to prevent. A bridge across the boundary between the two kinds of life. He is a long way from home. In most versions, he is passing through on his way to the garden at the far edge of the world, where the golden apples grow, and he needs directions, and there is only one person out here to ask. He sees the figure on the cliff. He sees the bird coming in, across the empty air, and he lifts the bow and shoots it. Hesiod, who tells the story of the killing of the eagle, even in the Theogony, is careful to add something important. He says that Zeus did not object, because the fame of Heracles would be increased by it, and Zeus, honoring his son, put aside the anger he had held before. That detail rescues the whole ending from being a simple defeat for Zeus. The release is permitted. The king does not lose. He relents, and he relents in a way that also glorifies his own child, which is exactly how a durable authority manages a climb down. But the release is not free, and the tradition attaches a condition to it that is one of the most quietly beautiful things in Greek mythology. Someone else has to take his place. An immortal must be willing to go down into death so that Prometheus can be let go, and someone volunteers. His name is Chiron. He is a centaur, but not like the others, who were famous for drunkenness and violence. Chiron was the wise one. He was the teacher. He raised and trained a long list of heroes, including, depending on the source, Achilles and Jason, and Asclepius, who became the god of medicine. He knew music and hunting, and above all healing, and Chiron had been wounded by accident, by one of Heracles' own arrows, which carried a poison that could not be cured. Because he was immortal, he could not die of it. He simply had to keep living with a wound that would not close, for as long as existence lasted. So when the offer came, he took it. He surrendered his immortality and went down into death, and Prometheus was released, the healer who cannot be healed, exchanging places with the one who cannot be freed. Two beings who both understood exactly what the other was carrying. Later tradition says Zeus set Chiron among the stars, and he is usually associated with the southern constellation Centaurus, which is visible on clear nights from the right latitudes, low over the horizon. The chains come off. The sources are quiet about the moment itself, and that silence is probably right. Some things do not want description. He would have had to learn to walk again. That is a small thought, but it stays with you. Whatever amount of time it was, 30 years or 30,000, he had been fixed in one position, looking at one horizon, and now the horizon could move. He goes down, below the snow, below the cloud, into the tree line, where there is soil and the smell of things that grow and rot. And at some point in the evening, he passes a settlement. There are fires there, cooking fires, in stone hearths, in front of houses built by people who knew how to build houses. There is metal in the doorways. There is a lamp somewhere. Someone is singing badly. A dog barks and then stops. None of them know who he is. None of them have ever heard the name. They are simply people at the end of an ordinary day, doing what people do, in the light that he brought. One tradition adds a small strange detail. Zeus had sworn that Prometheus would remain bound to the rock forever, and a god's oath cannot simply be cancelled. So Prometheus was made to wear a ring, made from the iron of his chains, and set with a fragment of the stone of the Caucasus. Technically, the oath held. He was still bound to the mountain. He simply carried it on his finger. There is something very Greek about that, a cosmic law satisfied by a piece of jewelry. And after that, Prometheus largely leaves mythology and enters something else. He becomes an idea. Before we follow him there, it is worth pausing on why this shape of story appears so persistently, in so many places, in so many centuries. Because it does. Somewhere there is a boundary. On the far side of it is knowledge. A figure crosses it. Human beings receive something that changes them permanently, and then the punishment arrives. You will find versions of that shape all over the ancient world, and modern readers frequently notice the resemblance. The most familiar is in Genesis. A garden, a tree, a prohibition, a serpent, and the acquisition of a knowledge of good and evil that was not intended for the creatures who acquired it. Afterwards, expulsion, labor, pain in childbirth, awareness of nakedness, which is to say self-consciousness, and death entering the world as a consequence of knowing. The parallels with the Greek material are genuine, and it would be dishonest to pretend otherwise. In both, a limitation is imposed by a higher power. In both, the limitation concerns knowledge, rather than territory or wealth. In both, a figure outside the ordinary human world is involved in the transgression. In both, humanity keeps what it gained and pays for it forever. It is equally important to say clearly what this does not mean. These are not the same story, and they did not come from a single original event that later cultures remembered imperfectly. That claim is made a great deal, and it is not supported. Hesiod was writing in an oral Greek tradition in the 8th or 7th century before the Common Era. The Genesis material comes out of a Hebrew context with its own long compositional history and an entirely different theology. There was contact between the Eastern Mediterranean cultures, and Near Eastern influence on early Greek poetry is a serious and well-evidenced field of study. But influence is not identity, and resemblance is not descent. What is being noticed is something more interesting than a hidden connection anyway. It is that human beings, when they think hard about where civilization came from, keep producing this shape, independently, repeatedly, in different languages, under different gods, with different endings. Ask why, and the answer may be uncomfortably simple. It is because the shape is accurate. Every genuine increase in human capability really has arrived with a cost attached, and every generation that acquires one really does find that it cannot go back. That is not mythology. That is the observable pattern of history, and ancient people were watching it happen just as we are. The other tradition frequently placed alongside Prometheus is stranger and less familiar, and it deserves a careful look. In the Jewish apocalyptic literature known as the Book of Enoch, parts of which were composed from around the 3rd century before the Common Era, there is an account of beings called the Watchers. They are heavenly. They look down at the earth and they desire what they see there, and a group of them, 200 in the earliest layer of the text, descend and bind themselves by oath to a shared plan, and having come down, they teach. That is the detail that catches everyone's attention. The text is specific about the curriculum. One of them, called Azazel in the surviving traditions, teaches the making of swords and knives and shields and breastplates. He teaches metalworking, the extraction and use of what lies in the ground. He teaches the use of antimony, and the beautifying of the eyelids, which is to say cosmetics, and the working of precious stones and coloring materials. Others teach the cutting of roots and the properties of plants, which is pharmacology. Others teach astrology, the reading of the stars, the signs of the sun and the moon and the clouds, metallurgy, weapons, medicine, adornment, and the reading of the heavens. Set that beside the list Prometheus recites in the Athenian theatre, and the overlap is startling. Metals from beneath the ground, remedies, the courses of the stars. The two lists are drawn from cultures with different gods and different assumptions, and they are describing the same inventory of civilization. What differs completely is the verdict. In the Greek material, the teaching is a gift, and the teacher is a benefactor who suffers for it, and the audience is invited to admire him. In the Enochic material, the teaching is a corruption. What follows is violence and bloodshed, and a world so damaged that the flood becomes necessary. The Watchers are bound and imprisoned beneath the earth until the day of judgment. Two ancient cultures looked at the same fact, that human beings possess arts which seem to have come from somewhere beyond ordinary human capability. And one of them said, this was the greatest thing that ever happened to us, and the other said, it was the beginning of everything that went wrong. Both of them agreed on the underlying observation. The knowledge came from outside, and it changed everything, and it cannot be given back. We should stay careful here. It is very easy, at this point in an argument, to slide into claiming that these traditions prove something about actual history, that beings really did descend and really did teach, and that the myths are records rather than reflections. That is a popular idea, and there is no evidence for it. The honest position is more modest and, in its own way, more interesting. Ancient societies found their own capabilities uncanny. Standing in a smithy watching a man pull liquid metal out of a stone, or watching a physician bring down a fever with a boiled root, or watching a priest predict an eclipse, it was entirely reasonable to feel that this knowledge did not obviously belong to the same creature that was born naked and helpless and afraid of the dark. So they explained it the only way available. Something greater than us gave it to us. And whether that was a crime or a blessing, they could not agree, because it plainly was both. Let that settle for a while. There is no conclusion to reach tonight. Let your breathing find its own pace. Let the thoughts loosen a little at the edges. The story will keep going quietly whether you follow every word or not. And return, one last time, to the question of who was right. Was Zeus the villain? A modern audience has almost no hesitation. Prometheus is the hero. He helped the weak. He defied a tyrant. He was punished for a kindness and endured it without breaking. Every instinct trained by 3 centuries of revolutions and rights and scientific progress says he was right and the king of the gods was wrong. An ancient Greek audience would have been slower. They would have seen a being who took upon himself decisions that were not his to take, who acted on behalf of others without consulting the order he was part of, whose actions produced consequences he could not control and did not have to live with, since the sufferings released from the jar fell upon mortals and not upon him. They would have used a word we have already met, hubris, and they would have applied it to Prometheus rather than to Zeus. They would also have noticed something that tends to get lost. Zeus in the Greek imagination is not primarily a bully. He is the guarantor. He is the one who protects the stranger and the suppliant, who guards the oath, who holds the whole structure together after 2 previous rulers failed to. Order in the Greek mind was not oppression. Order was the thing standing between the world and the chaos it came out of, and it had been achieved recently and at enormous cost. So the honest answer is that Prometheus is all of these things at once, and the tradition never resolved it, and that is why he lasted. He is a hero because he acted for beings who could not act for themselves. He is a trickster because he won by deception rather than strength. And tricksters in every mythology are the ones who move things that were supposed to stay still. He is a teacher, and possibly a maker, standing at the beginning of the human story. He is a rebel who was proved right about the ruler's injustice. And he is a transgressor who crossed a line that existed for reasons, and whose gift arrived carrying consequences that are still arriving. You do not have to choose. The Greeks did not. What happened next to Prometheus is one of the strangest afterlives any mythological figure has had. In Athens, he had a real cult, which surprises people who assume he was only a story. There was an altar in the grove of the Academy, shared with Athena and Hephaestus, the 2 other powers associated with craft. And there was a festival, the Prometheia, which included a torch race. Runners carried fire through the city, and the winner was not the fastest, but the one who arrived with the flame still burning. Consider that as an act of remembrance, not a statue, not a hymn. A relay, in which the whole point is that the light must be passed from one runner to the next without going out. Then Athens faded, and Rome came and went, and the old gods were dismissed, and for a long stretch of centuries, Prometheus was mostly a moral example in the margins of other people's books. A warning about pride, an allegory of the soul, occasionally a figure that Christian writers found uncomfortably familiar, since a being who suffers on a wooden or stony frame for the sake of humanity was not a shape they wished to see duplicated. And then, around 250 years ago, he came back with extraordinary force. The Romantics took him. Goethe wrote a poem in which Prometheus speaks directly to Zeus and tells him to keep his heaven, that he is sitting here making men in his own image regardless, and it reads less like mythology than like a declaration of independence. Byron wrote his Prometheus in 1816, calling his crime the being kind. Percy Shelley wrote an entire lyrical drama, Prometheus Unbound, attempting to supply the resolution that Aeschylus had lost, and refusing to let his Titan reconcile with the tyrant at all. Beethoven wrote music for a ballet about him. Later there were symphonies and paintings, and a great gilded figure that still lies above the sunken plaza, at the Rockefeller Center in New York, falling to earth with a flame in his hand, above an inscription about fire bringing the arts to mortals. Why then? Why did a titan from an 8th century Greek poem suddenly become the most useful figure in Europe? Because Europe was, at that exact moment, doing what he did. The furnaces were being lit, the steam engine was arriving, chemistry was taking matter apart. Old authorities were being questioned or overthrown, and a generation was discovering that a person who takes something from those above them and hands it to those below is either a criminal or a liberator, depending entirely on who writes it down. And in the middle of all this, in the summer of 1816, in a rented house beside a lake in Switzerland, an 18-year-old woman wrote a story. The weather that year was famously terrible. A volcano called Pandora had erupted in Indonesia the previous spring and thrown enough material into the atmosphere to disrupt the climate across the northern hemisphere. Crops failed across Europe. It was known afterwards as the year without a summer. The party by the lake could not go outdoors, and so they stayed in and read ghost stories to each other and agreed that each would write one. Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein. She published it in 1818, and she gave it a subtitle that tells you she knew exactly what she was doing: The Modern Prometheus. Look at how precisely it fits. A man who acquires a knowledge that was not meant to be had, who assembles a body out of raw material and gives it life, which is the clay story exactly, transferred from a hillside to a laboratory, who succeeds, absolutely and completely, at the thing he set out to do, and who then looks at what he has made and cannot bear it and runs out of the room. That is Shelley's real contribution, and it is why the book has never gone out of print. The horror of Frankenstein is not the creature. The creature is articulate and lonely, and reads Milton, and asks reasonable questions. The horror is the moment of achievement followed immediately by the discovery that no thought whatsoever had been given to the morning after. Victor Frankenstein has all of Prometheus's daring and none of his foresight. He is the brother with the wrong name. He is Epimetheus in a laboratory coat, understanding afterwards. And the creature, abandoned, unequipped, naked and unshod and unarmed, in a world that has no place for it, is standing in exactly the position Plato described, the thing that was made last and left over and given nothing. The old question returns, in a new century, wearing new clothes. Not can we, should we? And it has kept returning, more insistently each time, all the way to now. Consider what human beings can currently do. We can hold lightning in a wire and run it under the streets of a city, so that the night is no longer dark anywhere that anyone lives. Look at a photograph of the Earth, taken from orbit after sunset, and you are looking at the last image in tonight's story, rendered in full. The fires spreading across the plain, except now the plain is a continent, and the fires are visible from space. We can split the nucleus of an atom, which is to say we can reach into the level of reality that holds matter together and take some of it apart. The energy released is the same energy that powers the sun, and we can use it to run a city for a year, or to erase one in a second, and the identical understanding produces both. We can read the genetic code of a living thing, and increasingly, we can write it. We can correct a hereditary illness at the level where it is stored, and the same tools, in the same hands, raise questions about what should be corrected, and who decides what counts as a fault, and whether a species that has always been shaped by things outside itself should now begin shaping itself. We can build machines that generate language, and reason after a fashion, and answer questions, and hold a conversation at 3 in the morning with a person who cannot sleep. That development is very new, and the honest position about where it leads is that nobody knows, including the people building it. And we can leave. We have put our footprints on another world, and our instruments beyond the edge of the solar system, and there are objects made by human hands, now moving through interstellar space, carrying pictures of the people who made them. Every one of those is a Promethean act in the exact sense the myth describes. Each takes something that was not previously available to a creature made of clay and puts it in our hands. Each one, once acquired, cannot be given back. That is the part the myth is most insistent about, and the part that is easiest to forget. Knowledge does not return to the jar. There has never been a discovery that was successfully unmade. There has never been a technique that a civilization acquired and then genuinely forgot on purpose. Things are lost through catastrophe, but nothing is ever put back voluntarily, because the moment a thing is known to be possible, the knowing is the difficult part, and it has already happened. So the ancient warning is not that we should refuse the fire. The myth is not asking that, and it never was. Prometheus is not condemned by the tradition, and he is released in the end, and the Athenians ran through their streets carrying flames in his honor. The warning is smaller and harder. It is that the gift always arrives before the wisdom to use it. Always. That is the sequence in Plato, where craft is stolen first, and justice must be sent down afterwards as a corrective. That is the sequence at Mecone, where the arrangement is made and the consequences are discovered later. That is the sequence in Frankenstein, where the achievement precedes the thought by a considerable margin. And it is our sequence too. It always has been. Fire warms the room and burns the city, and it does not know the difference, and it never has. Let that thought go now. Let it drift off the way smoke does. The night is quite far along, and there is nothing left to work out. So what is he in the end? Perhaps he is intelligence itself, the part of a mind that looks at a limitation and treats it as a question rather than a wall. Perhaps he is technology, which arrives disguised as convenience and reorganizes it. Perhaps he is the idea of sacrifice, the being who accepts a cost he could avoid on behalf of others who will never know his name. Perhaps he is consciousness, which is the strange condition of being an animal that knows it is an animal, and knows it will end, and thinks about tomorrow anyway. Perhaps he is simply the refusal to accept a portion, the one who was told where the line was, and looked at it, and did not agree. Or perhaps Prometheus is not a character at all. Perhaps he is the name the Greeks gave to the part of us that always goes to look, because we do. That is the one thing that can be said about human beings without any argument at all. Whatever the boundary is, somebody walks up to it and puts a hand through, across the water, to see what is on the other side of it, over the mountains, in winter, without knowing what is beyond them, down into the ground and into the rock, out onto the ocean in wooden boats with no map, on the assumption that there must be something, into the atom, into the cell, into the sky, and then past it, into the workings of thought itself. Every civilization that has ever existed eventually asks what is beyond the horizon. And in every one of them, sooner or later, somebody goes to find out, and does not come back the same, and neither does anyone else. Let yourself become heavier now. There is nothing more to follow. Go back, one last time, to where we started. The old coastline. The hills running down to the water. The dry grass and the pine and the stone still holding a little of the day's warmth. It is night again. The stars have come out across the whole sky, uncountable, the way they only are in places with no light at all beneath them. The sea moves quietly somewhere below, and the wind comes up the slope, and the pines shift and settle. And there in the shelter of the rocks there is a fire. It is not large. Someone has built it well, with the stones set round it, and it is burning down now to the deep orange stage where it does not flicker much and gives off a steady heat. There are people around it. A few of them are still talking, quietly, about nothing important. Someone has fallen asleep already, wrapped up, close to the warmth. A child is watching the flames the way children do, entirely absorbed, seeing shapes in them. Above them stands the enormous night. They do not know what they have. They cannot possibly know. They do not know that from this small circle of light will come the kiln and the forge, the ship and the wheel, the temple and the library, and the university, that there will be cities lit from within, observatories turned upward at the same stars they are lying beneath, engines, electric light, machines that leave the earth entirely and send back photographs of other worlds. They only know that they are warm, and that they are together, and that tonight the dark stays at a comfortable distance. And very far away, on a mountain at the edge of everything, the chains are lying open on the rock, and the wind moves across the empty stone, and there is nothing there anymore. He is gone. Wherever he went, the tradition does not say. But if you could stand at that height, in the cold and the quiet, and look out across the curve of the world in the darkness, you would see them. Fires, small ones, scattered all down the valleys and along the coasts and out to the horizon, each one a family, each one a room made out of light, in the middle of a night that used to have nothing in it at all. Humanity kept the gift. That is the whole of it, really. He gave us something that was not ours, and we have never once put it down, and we have been carrying it ever since, from one runner to the next, through every century, without letting it go out. Perhaps that is why 3,000 years later, in a world he could not have imagined, lying in a warm room with the lights off and a voice in the dark, we still remember his name. Let the story go now. It has been told, and it will keep. Let the mountain go, and the eagle, and the jar with its lid closed, and the long argument between the god and the titan that was never settled and does not need to be settled tonight. Let your body become heavy where it rests. Let the breath slow and slow again, and find its own quiet rhythm without any help from you. Everything you are carrying today can stay outside the circle of light. It will still be there in the morning if it matters, and most of it will not. There is only the warmth and the dark beyond it, and the enormous soft night stretching out over the whole world, over everyone who is sleeping now, in every country, in every time zone, all of us under the same stars. The fire is burning low. You are safe. You are warm. There is nothing to do. Sleep now. Sleep into power, guys. Good night.